Roddy Piper was one of the most hated wrestlers in history. He could make entire arenas want to kill him just by walking to the ring in his kilt with bagpipes. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Despite being the biggest heel in wrestling during the 1980s boom, he never once held the WWF Championship, not even for a day. This wasn't an accident. There were backstage politics, power plays, and decisions made in boardrooms that kept the belt away from wrestling's most compelling villain. What turns a 13-year-old kid into one of wrestling's most feared villains? For Roderick George Toombs, the answer started in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where his childhood was anything but normal. His father, Stanley Baird Toombs, worked for the Canadian National Railway Police, but that badge and uniform couldn't protect young Roderick from the chaos at home. The family moved constantly across Canada as his father's job demanded transfers from one posting to another. By the time he was a teenager, Roderick had been constantly relocated between many schools. School became a battlefield for him. He didn't fit in anywhere, and he didn't want to. Teachers saw him as a troublemaker. Other kids saw him as the weird new guy who would probably be gone in a few months anyway. He got into fights regularly, and his grades suffered. The constant moving meant he never formed lasting friendships or learned how to trust people. At 13 years old, he was expelled from school for carrying a switchblade. That was the moment his childhood officially ended. His father kicked him out of the house after the expulsion. Roderick found himself living in youth hostels across Western Canada, bouncing from one city to another with nothing but the clothes on his back. He slept in train stations, under bridges, and anywhere else he could find shelter. He learned fast how to survive on the streets, dumpster diving for food and panhandling for change. Some nights he went to bed hungry. The anger that would later make him famous started building during those months on the street. Every day was about survival. Every person he met might try to take advantage of him or hurt him. He developed a hard edge that most people don't get until they're adults, if they ever get it at all. The pain wasn't just physical from sleeping rough or going without food. It was the emotional pain of being abandoned by his own family when he needed them most. Boxing gyms became his refuge during this period. He discovered he had natural fighting ability and trainers who were willing to work with him. The discipline of boxing gave him structure that had been missing from his life. He claimed amateur boxing success, including golden gloves in interviews. A claim often repeated but not confirmed in tournament lists. He also trained in judo, learning grappling techniques that would serve him well later. These weren't hobbies for him, like they might be for other teenagers. These were survival skills. His first wrestling experiences came when he was still a teenager, training in Canada and working with promoters like Al Tomko. His early AWA work put him in the ring opposite veterans like Larry Hennig, and he later worked with trainers including Gene LeBell and Leo Garibaldi. These mentors saw something in the angry young man that others might have missed. Roderick had legitimate fighting skills from his boxing and judo training, but more than that, he had an authenticity that most wrestlers spend years trying to fake. When he got angry in the ring, it wasn't an act. The other wrestlers noticed this right away. Most guys who came into wrestling had to learn how to make their emotions bigger and more dramatic for the crowd. Roderick's problem was the opposite. He had to learn how to control his real anger so it didn't get him arrested or banned from arenas. His early matches were raw and sometimes dangerous because he hadn't learned how to work safely with opponents while still maintaining that edge that made him special. His experiences sleeping rough had taught him how to read people quickly and accurately. He could spot weakness or fear in opponents before they even knew they were showing it. He learned how to use psychological warfare as effectively as any physical move. The other wrestlers were often older and more experienced, but most of them had never faced genuine hardship like he had. They were playing tough guys. He actually was one. What made him different from other wrestlers with hard backgrounds was his intelligence. He wasn't just a street tough who could throw punches. He studied how crowds reacted to different things he said or did. He watched other wrestlers' promos and matches, learning what worked and what didn't. He began to understand that his real-life pain and anger could be his greatest weapons if he learned how to channel them properly. During his youth, he had also learned to play bagpipes, a skill that seemed unrelated to wrestling at the time. But like everything else from his difficult past, it would eventually become part of his arsenal. The authenticity that came from his brutal upbringing became his calling card. When he cut promos talking about being tough or surviving hard times, every word carried weight because audiences could sense he had lived it. His difficult childhood wasn't just backstory for his wrestling character. It was the foundation that everything else would be built on. The anger, the survival instincts, the ability to read people and situations quickly, the legitimate fighting skills, and most importantly, the authentic edge that made audiences uncomfortable. He had all the raw materials needed to become wrestling's most hated villain. But having the tools and knowing how to use them were two different things entirely. Portland Wrestling became the laboratory where Piper built his villain act. Promoter Don Owen ran the Pacific Northwest Territory with a tight ship, but gave wrestlers freedom to experiment with their characters as long as they could generate heat. Piper found himself in the perfect environment for learning what made people truly angry. The first thing he discovered was that being genuinely disliked was actually a valuable skill in wrestling. Most wrestlers spent their careers trying to get fans to cheer for them, but someone had to be the bad guy, and there was serious money in making people hate you. The more they hated you, the more they would pay to see you lose. It was backwards logic that made perfect sense in the wrestling business. His breakthrough came when he started incorporating his Scottish heritage into his character. He began wearing kilts to the ring and playing bagpipes during his entrance. The crowd reaction was immediate and violent. Fans in Portland didn't just boo him. They threw things at him. They screamed death threats. They tried to climb over the guardrails to get at him. The bagpipes were particularly effective because the sound was so annoying that it made people angry before he even started wrestling. The kilt and bagpipes weren't just costumes and props. He turned them into weapons for psychological warfare. He used the bagpipes as purposeful provocation, part of his routine to rile crowds. He used the kilt and staged gestures to push conservative crowds past their breaking point. Every detail was calculated to make people uncomfortable and angry. He watched other wrestlers' promos and learned the psychology of crowd manipulation. Some wrestlers tried to be scary, others tried to be arrogant. Piper realized that the most effective approach was to be genuinely irritating. He developed a speaking style that was part Scottish accent, part street smart punk, and completely annoying. His voice had a nasal quality that cut through arena noise and got under people's skin. His tag team partnership with Rick Martel gave him a chance to learn from a technically superior wrestler while developing his character work. Martel was a gifted athlete who could make anyone look good in the ring. Working with him taught Piper how to pace a match and build drama. They won multiple Pacific Northwest Tag Team Championships together, establishing Piper's credibility as both a performer and a draw. The success was always secondary to the reaction they generated. Crowds would get so worked up during their matches that security had to be increased. Fans would wait outside the arena after shows, hoping to confront them. The local newspapers started writing about the wrestlers as if they were real criminals rather than entertainers. Portland Wrestling became his laboratory for testing what made audiences truly angry. He tried different approaches in different towns to see what generated the strongest reactions. In some places, insulting local sports teams worked best. In others, making fun of local politicians got bigger heat. He learned that the key was finding whatever people cared about most and then attacking it without mercy. His mic work during this period was fearless in ways that shocked even other wrestlers. Most heels would insult the crowd in generic ways. Piper would get specific and personal. He would research local news stories and work them into his promos. He would make fun of local tragedies or economic problems. Other wrestlers thought he was taking things too far, but the crowds proved them wrong with their passionate hatred. Wrestling magazines started writing about him as one of the most hated wrestlers in the country. Other promoters began calling Don Owen to ask about booking him for their territories. His reputation for generating genuine heat was spreading beyond the Pacific Northwest. Wrestlers from other regions would visit Portland shows just to watch him work and try to figure out what made him so effective. He was creating something entirely new in wrestling. Most heels relied on standard tactics, like cheating or making fun of local sports teams. Piper had developed a character that was so thoroughly irritating and offensive that audiences forgot they were watching entertainment. They genuinely wanted to hurt him. That level of emotional investment was exactly what wrestling promoters were looking for. The other wrestlers backstage started treating him differently. Some were jealous of the attention he was getting. Others were genuinely impressed by his ability to manipulate crowds. A few were actually afraid of him because they weren't sure where the character ended and the real person began. His reputation for unpredictability became part of his appeal to promoters who wanted something different from their main event heels. Portland wasn't just where Piper learned to wrestle. It was where he learned to weaponize hatred and turn it into the most valuable commodity in professional wrestling. But his education in villainy was about to take a much more dangerous turn. The skills he had perfected in the Pacific Northwest were about to be tested in ways that would leave permanent scars. His next challenge came in Jim Crockett Promotions, where the competition was tougher and the stakes higher than anything he had experienced in Portland. This was serious wrestling territory with television coverage that reached millions of homes across the southeastern United States. His arrival in Mid-Atlantic wrestling put him directly in the path of Greg the Hammer Valentine, already established as one of the territory's top heels with legitimate amateur wrestling credentials and wrestling royalty bloodlines as Johnny Valentine's son. Their rivalry started over the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship. Valentine held the title and saw Piper as an upstart from the Northwest who didn't belong in his territory. Piper saw Valentine as everything he hated about wrestling establishment figures who thought they were better than street fighters like him. Neither man was willing to show weakness or give ground to the other. Their matches became increasingly violent as each tried to prove he was tougher than his opponent. The feud escalated when Valentine injured Piper's ear during one of their encounters. He used a move that drove his elbow directly into Piper's ear with unusual force. The injury was real and serious, causing immediate pain and hearing problems. But instead of backing down or taking time off to heal, Piper used the injury to fuel his anger and make their rivalry even more personal. He started cutting promos about how Valentine was trying to end his career and destroy his livelihood. Valentine played his part perfectly, claiming that he was going to finish what he started and put Piper out of wrestling permanently. He would target the injured ear during every match, applying submission holds that put pressure on the damaged area. The crowds could see that Piper was in genuine pain, which made them more invested in seeing him get revenge. This wasn't fake wrestling drama. This was real violence being used to sell tickets. The build-up to the dog collar match at the first Starrcade in 1983 was unlike anything wrestling had seen before. Both men would be connected by a steel chain attached to dog collars around their necks. There would be no escape and no way to avoid punishment. The match was designed to be the final chapter in their brutal rivalry. Wrestling fans across the country knew they were about to witness something special and violent. The dog collar match itself lived up to every bit of hype that surrounded it. Connected by the chain, both men used it as a weapon to choke and beat each other. They fought all over the arena, not just in the ring. The chain left marks on both wrestlers as they used it to slam each other into ring posts and barriers. Blood flowed freely as the match turned into something that looked more like a real fight than sports entertainment. During the match, Valentine broke Piper's eardrum. The trauma from the chain and Valentine's continued targeting of the area caused permanent damage that would affect his hearing for the rest of his life. Piper later lost roughly 50 to 75% of his hearing in that ear. This wasn't a storyline injury that would heal after a few weeks. This was real damage that he would carry with him forever. Instead of ending his career, the injury became part of his legend. Wrestling fans and other wrestlers saw what he was willing to sacrifice for his craft. The ear injury proved that his toughness wasn't just an act or part of his character. He was genuinely willing to risk permanent physical damage to put on a show for the fans. This reputation for real toughness made other wrestlers respect him and fear him at the same time. His wars with Ric Flair during this period showed another side of his abilities. Flair was the complete opposite of Valentine, a technical wrestler who relied on psychology and showmanship rather than pure violence. Working with Flair taught Piper how to adjust his style to different opponents while maintaining his edge. When Piper beat Ric Flair for the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship, it established him as a main event player in one of wrestling's most competitive territories. He defended the title against top wrestlers from across the country and proved he could carry a major championship. These matches elevated him from regional star to national sensation. Wrestling magazines started featuring him on covers. Other territories began making offers to book him for their biggest shows. His reputation for generating heat and delivering in big matches made him one of the most sought-after wrestlers in the country. The ear injury proved Piper would sacrifice his body for his craft, and it made him more dangerous than ever. His willingness to work through real pain and injury showed a level of dedication that impressed even his harshest critics backstage. This reputation for authentic toughness caught the attention of Vince McMahon, who was always looking for wrestlers who could handle the pressures of national television and create moments that would shock audiences beyond anything they had seen before. McMahon found exactly what he was looking for when he signed Piper to the WWE in 1984. Television was becoming crucial to wrestling success, and McMahon needed programming that would keep audiences watching between matches. He created Piper's Pit as a talk show segment where Piper would interview wrestlers and celebrities in a cheap studio setting with fake plants and a cheesy backdrop. Piper was perfect for hosting because his natural ability to irritate people could turn any interview into a confrontation within minutes. The segment launched without much fanfare, but McMahon knew they needed a moment that would shock audiences and create mainstream attention. Wrestling was trying to break into popular culture beyond just wrestling fans. The setup came when Jimmy Snuka was booked as a guest. Snuka was one of the most popular wrestlers in the company, a high-flying performer from the Pacific Islands. Piper arrived at the studio with a bag of coconuts as props, telling the production crew he was going to demonstrate the hardness of Snuka's head by smashing them. Everyone assumed this was typical Piper showboating. The cameras started rolling, and Piper began making insulting comments about Snuka's background and intelligence. He started smashing coconuts with his bare hands, making jokes about how they reminded him of Snuka's head. The audience was already uncomfortable with the racial undertones, but then Piper grabbed one of the broken coconut pieces and smashed it directly into Snuka's skull. Snuka went down like he had been hit with a baseball bat. Blood started flowing from his head immediately. The attack looked completely real because in many ways it was. Piper had used a real coconut as a weapon and caused genuine injury. The studio audience went silent before erupting in boos and screams. Some people tried to rush the set to help Snuka or attack Piper. The aftermath generated more heat than most wrestlers created in their entire careers. Wrestling fans were outraged by the apparent brutality and racism of the attack. Mainstream media picked up the story as an example of how violent and offensive wrestling had become. The WWE received hundreds of angry phone calls and letters demanding that Piper be fired or arrested. But the controversy was exactly what the WWE needed. The coconut incident became the most talked-about moment in wrestling that year. It established Piper's Pit as must-see television and proved that the WWE could create moments that transcended the wrestling audience. Every wrestling fan in the country wanted to see what Piper would do next. Piper's Pit became the template for all future wrestling talk show segments, influencing later shows like Chris Jericho's Highlight Reel and The Miz's Miz TV. Other promotions started creating their own interview segments hosted by heel wrestlers. The format of having a controversial host interview guests in a setting designed to create conflict became a standard part of wrestling television. Other memorable moments on the show kept audiences coming back week after week. Piper would insult local sports teams, make fun of other wrestlers' personal lives, and create situations that led to brawls and destruction of the set. Each segment was designed to advance storylines while generating maximum heat for upcoming matches. The segment elevated both Piper and his guests to new levels of fame within the wrestling industry. Wrestlers who appeared on Piper's Pit automatically became more important in fans' minds. Being chosen as a guest was seen as a sign that the company had big plans for a wrestler. The show gave wrestlers a platform to build their characters through confrontations and interviews, rather than just in-ring action. Piper's ability to generate controversy and mainstream attention made him invaluable to McMahon's expansion plans. His talk show segment proved that wrestling could create compelling television content beyond just matches. The format allowed for character development and storyline advancement in ways that traditional wrestling programming couldn't match. The success of Piper's Pit demonstrated that Piper wasn't just a wrestler who could work matches. He was an entertainer who could carry television programming and generate the kind of mainstream buzz that McMahon needed for his national expansion. His natural charisma and ability to create controversy made him perfect for the bigger stage that wrestling was about to enter. The coconut incident and the ongoing success of Piper's Pit established him as one of wrestling's most valuable performers. He had proven he could generate heat, carry television segments, and create moments that people would never forget. His villainous charisma was becoming essential to the WWE's plans for something much bigger than anyone in wrestling had ever attempted before. WrestleMania 1 was a make-or-break moment for Vince McMahon's national expansion plan, and it all depended on whether people would pay to see Piper lose. By 1985, McMahon had spent millions of dollars buying out regional promoters, signing their biggest stars, and putting everything on cable television. But the whole scheme would collapse if he couldn't prove that wrestling could draw mainstream audiences willing to pay premium prices for live events. The WWE's national expansion strategy was built around the rock and wrestling connection with MTV. McMahon understood that wrestling needed to break out of its traditional audience to survive. MTV was the perfect partner because it reached exactly the demographic he wanted: young people with disposable income who weren't already wrestling fans. The music television network was looking for programming that would generate controversy and keep viewers watching. Wrestling provided both. The entire future of wrestling hinged on the success of the first WrestleMania at Madison Square Garden. McMahon had invested everything he owned and borrowed millions more to finance the event. If it failed, he would lose his company and probably go bankrupt. Other wrestling promoters around the country were watching and hoping he would fail, so they could keep their territories safe from his expansion. The pressure was enormous. Piper's central role in the main event alongside Paul Orndorff against Hulk Hogan and Mr. T made him the key to the whole operation. The match was designed around celebrity involvement to attract mainstream media attention. Mr. T was one of the biggest stars in entertainment at the time because of the A-Team television show. But having celebrities in wrestling matches was risky because they couldn't actually wrestle and might embarrass everyone involved. His feud with Hogan had been building for months through Piper's Pit segments and other WWE programming. The war to settle the score aired on MTV and helped build the Hogan-Piper storyline before WrestleMania, drawing huge ratings and proving wrestling could succeed on cable television. Hogan was the all-American hero, Piper was the abrasive antagonist, a contrast MTV-friendly mainstream audiences could easily pick sides on. The involvement with celebrities brought mainstream credibility that wrestling had never experienced before. Mr. T's participation meant that major entertainment media had to cover WrestleMania as a legitimate news story. Television shows, newspapers, and magazines that normally ignored wrestling were forced to write about it because one of their biggest stars was involved. This coverage reached millions of people who had never watched a wrestling match. The massive media attention that Piper helped generate went beyond anything wrestling had achieved before. He appeared on talk shows, gave interviews to major newspapers, and became the face of wrestling's villain side for mainstream audiences. His ability to play the perfect bad guy in interviews made journalists want to write about him because he gave them controversial quotes that would attract readers. Celebrity involvement expanded beyond just the main event participants. Muhammad Ali served as the special guest referee, adding even more mainstream star power to the event. Cyndi Lauper was involved in other storylines on the card. The combination of wrestling stars and entertainment celebrities created a spectacle that attracted attention from people who normally wouldn't care about professional wrestling. His heel work made Hogan look like an even bigger hero to casual fans who were watching wrestling for the first time. Piper's job was to be so thoroughly unlikable that anyone opposing him would automatically become the good guy. He insulted American values, made fun of popular culture, and acted like everything decent people believed in was stupid. This made Hogan's victory even more satisfying for audiences. Other crossover moments during this period included appearances by wrestlers on MTV programming and music videos featuring wrestling storylines. The partnership between WWE and MTV created a cultural phenomenon that made wrestling cool for teenagers and young adults who had never watched it before. Piper was central to many of these crossover moments because his character was easy for non-wrestling fans to understand and hate. The success of WrestleMania changed wrestling forever by proving that the business could attract mainstream audiences and generate massive revenue from pay-per-view events. The event sold out Madison Square Garden and drew significant closed-circuit television audiences around the country. More importantly, it established wrestling as legitimate entertainment that could compete with other major sporting events for audience attention and media coverage. Piper's villainous charisma didn't just help WrestleMania succeed. It created the template for wrestling's mainstream future, where controversial characters and celebrity involvement would become standard elements of major events. His work as the primary antagonist proved that wrestling needed great villains, just as much as it needed heroic champions. But despite headlining the event that launched wrestling into the mainstream and proving himself as one of the industry's biggest draws, something was missing from Piper's resume that should have been automatic for a star of his magnitude. The WWE Championship remained out of reach, despite every indication that Piper had earned it. By 1986, he had proven himself as the most effective heel in wrestling history. He had main-evented WrestleMania, revolutionized wrestling television, and generated more heat than any wrestler of his generation. Fans packed arenas specifically to see him lose. His merchandise sold despite him being the villain. Every metric that mattered in wrestling showed he was ready for a championship run. But the WWE Championship never came. This wasn't an oversight or booking mistake. Piper never held the WWE Championship during his peak years in the 1980s, creating one of wrestling's most notable anomalies. Despite his massive popularity and proven drawing power, the title remained off-limits. The decision came from the top of the company and reflected backstage considerations that had nothing to do with his ability or fan support. Wrestling insiders knew something was happening behind the scenes that kept the title away from one of the company's biggest stars. 3 documented factors likely contributed to keeping the championship away from Piper. First, Vince McMahon's booking philosophy centered around having controllable, media-friendly champions who could represent the company in mainstream appearances. Hulk Hogan was perfect for this role because he stayed in character, followed company guidelines, and never created controversy outside of scripted storylines. He was reliable and predictable in ways that made McMahon comfortable putting him in front of corporate sponsors and television executives. Second, concerns about Piper's unpredictable nature and outspoken behavior created problems for McMahon's vision of mainstream success. Piper had a reputation for speaking his mind, regardless of company policy or political considerations. He would go off script during interviews and create situations that made corporate partners nervous. His later controversies, including an HBO interview that WWE used as cause for his release in 2003, demonstrated the kind of unpredictable behavior that made him risky as a flagship champion. Third, occasional behind-the-scenes conflicts reinforced McMahon's reluctance to give Piper more power within the company. Reports and backstage accounts indicate that Piper's independent streak and willingness to challenge authority created tension. McMahon valued loyalty and predictability in his champions. He wanted wrestlers who would follow company direction without question and represent the WWE according to his vision. The company's expansion into mainstream entertainment required champions who could appear on talk shows and corporate events without creating controversy. Piper's interview style was designed to generate heat and make people angry. This worked perfectly for building wrestling storylines, but it could backfire in mainstream media appearances where controversy might hurt business relationships. McMahon needed champions who could turn the heel act off when representing the company outside wrestling contexts. However, the championship snub wasn't universal across promotions. Piper did hold other meaningful titles that demonstrated he was trusted with major belts elsewhere. He won NWA United States Championships during his time in Jim Crockett Promotions and later captured the Intercontinental Championship in 1992. His multiple United States title reigns in JCP and WCW showed that other promoters saw him as championship material. This adds nuance to the snub narrative and suggests the issue was specific to McMahon's vision for the WWE's top prize. Other wrestlers and industry insiders viewed the obvious snub as evidence of backstage politics that had nothing to do with wrestling ability. Veterans who worked with both Hogan and Piper knew that Piper was just as capable of carrying the company as champion. His matches drew money and his storylines kept fans interested. The fact that he never got the opportunity, despite his obvious qualifications, created resentment among wrestlers who felt politics trumped merit. Wrestling journalists and industry observers began writing about the championship snub as an example of how business considerations sometimes overrode wrestling logic. Fans started questioning why their favorite heel never got rewarded with title runs, despite being more entertaining than many champions. The situation became an open secret within wrestling circles that McMahon's booking decisions were influenced by factors beyond just drawing power and fan reaction. Business considerations ultimately outweighed wrestling merit in championship decisions. The WWE was trying to become a mainstream entertainment company that could attract corporate sponsors and television deals. Having an unpredictable champion who might say something controversial could jeopardize these business relationships. McMahon chose safety over excitement when it came to his top championship. Piper's championship snub revealed the politics behind wrestling's biggest prize. The championship went to wrestlers who fit McMahon's vision of what a champion should be, rather than who fans most wanted to see win it. This policy showed how business considerations could override wrestling logic, even when it meant leaving money on the table. His success would have to come from other areas of entertainment, where his unpredictable nature might be seen as an asset rather than a liability. Hollywood became the proving ground where Piper's unpredictable nature finally paid off. Most wrestlers who try acting end up embarrassing themselves. Piper became a cult icon. By the late 1980s, his wrestling career had reached its peak, but the championship snub left him looking for new challenges. Hollywood offered an opportunity to prove his talents extended beyond the wrestling ring. Most wrestlers who made the transition to movies failed spectacularly, becoming punchlines rather than legitimate actors. The entertainment industry viewed wrestlers as muscle-bound performers who couldn't handle real acting demands. Director John Carpenter was working on a science fiction film called They Live and needed someone who could convincingly play a blue-collar drifter who discovers an alien conspiracy. The role required an actor who looked tough enough to be believable as a construction worker, but could also handle dialogue and carry dramatic scenes. Carpenter had seen Piper's work on television and thought his natural intensity might translate well to film. Wrestling fans and movie critics both expected him to fail as an actor when news of his casting broke. Wrestling had a terrible reputation in Hollywood circles. Movie executives saw wrestlers as cartoon characters who couldn't handle serious dramatic work. Critics assumed They Live would be another cheaply made action movie designed to capitalize on wrestling's popularity without any real artistic merit. His preparation for the role surprised everyone involved in the production. He approached acting with the same dedication he brought to wrestling, studying his character's background and motivations. He worked with acting coaches to improve his delivery and learn film techniques that were different from wrestling promos. The other actors on set were impressed by how seriously he took the craft and how willing he was to take direction. They Live was released in 1988 and featured the famous line, "I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum." His character's declaration captured audiences' imagination and became one of the most quoted movie phrases of the decade. The line was delivered with perfect timing and showed he had natural comedic timing that nobody expected from his wrestling persona. They Live became a cult classic that elevated his profile beyond wrestling into mainstream entertainment culture. The movie's themes about media manipulation and hidden control structures resonated with audiences who saw it as commentary on American society. His performance as the working-class hero who fights against corporate conspiracy made him a legitimate action star. Critics who expected to dismiss his acting were forced to admit he had genuine screen presence and later acknowledged him as a cult icon. His other film work included Hell Comes to Frogtown and a string of B-movies and TV roles that turned him into a cult actor. He approached each project with the same professionalism he showed in They Live. building a resume that proved his acting success wasn't just luck. His natural charisma translated well to different types of entertainment, making him a valuable performer for various projects. He balanced his entertainment career with periodic returns to wrestling, using his Hollywood credentials to negotiate better deals and more creative control. His acting success raised his mainstream profile and gave him crossover credibility that helped him negotiate returns and shaped how promoters viewed him. Wrestling promoters who had previously dismissed him as just another wrestler now saw him as a legitimate entertainment personality with crossover appeal. Television work became a regular part of his schedule as producers discovered he could handle both dramatic and comedic roles. He appeared on popular shows as both guest star and recurring character, proving his acting range extended beyond action movies. His entertainment success changed how wrestling promoters viewed him when he made return appearances. Instead of being seen as just another wrestler looking for one more payday, he was now a proven entertainment commodity with value beyond wrestling. The success in Hollywood proved that wrestlers could be legitimate entertainers if they had the right combination of natural talent and professional dedication. Other wrestlers began following his path into acting, though few achieved his level of success. He had broken down barriers that existed between wrestling and mainstream entertainment, proving that athletic entertainers could succeed in other areas of show business. The Hollywood experience taught him new skills that he brought back to wrestling. His improved acting ability made his wrestling promos more convincing and entertaining. He understood camera angles and timing in ways that made his wrestling performances more polished. The crossover between his acting and wrestling careers created a synergy that benefited both. His success didn't just prove wrestlers could be legitimate entertainers. It opened doors for future wrestlers who wanted to expand beyond the ring into other areas of entertainment. He had created a template that others could follow, showing that wrestling could be a stepping stone to broader entertainment success rather than a dead-end career. But even with Hollywood success under his belt, Piper wasn't finished with wrestling. The ring kept calling him back for battles that would test more than just his acting skills. His later career became a battle against time and his own body's limitations. By the mid-1990s, Piper was approaching his 40s and decades of punishment were taking their toll. His knees ached from countless matches, his back hurt from taking bumps on concrete floors and steel chairs. The hearing loss from his ear injury years earlier was getting worse, but he wasn't ready to retire completely from the business that had made him famous. Age and health issues began affecting his ability to perform at his previous level when he signed with World Championship Wrestling in late 1996. WCW was trying to compete with the WWE by signing established stars who could draw television ratings and pay-per-view buys. Piper still had name recognition and the ability to cut promos that generated heat, but his in-ring work was noticeably slower than it had been during his prime years in the 1980s. His World Championship Wrestling run gave him opportunities that had been denied during his World Wrestling Entertainment peak. He debuted in late 1996, feuded with Hogan and the NWO, briefly served as on-air commissioner, and had several high-profile matches and angles through 1999 before leaving in 2000. The Monday Night Wars between WCW and WWE meant both companies were desperate for star power and willing to push older wrestlers in ways they might not have considered during normal circumstances. His feuds with Hulk Hogan took on new meaning in WCW because both men were older and their careers were winding down. Their matches lacked the athleticism of their younger days, but made up for it with storytelling and the history between the characters. Fans who had watched their rivalry in the WWE during the 1980s were interested in seeing how their story would continue in a different company with different circumstances. Piper beat Hogan in a non-title Starrcade main event, a big win on paper, but not an actual world title change. The victory came more than a decade after most people thought he deserved a major championship run. While he was past his physical prime, the high-profile win proved he could still draw money and generate interest from wrestling audiences. His role as WCW commissioner allowed him to stay involved in wrestling storylines without having to wrestle full-time matches that his body could no longer handle effectively. The position gave him authority over other wrestlers and let him use his promo skills to advance storylines and create television drama. It was a natural fit for someone who had always been better at talking than most wrestlers were at wrestling. His continued involvement in wrestling through mentoring younger wrestlers gave him purpose during his later years. He worked with wrestlers like Virgil and Sean O'Haire, who wanted to improve their promo skills and learn how to generate heat from audiences. His knowledge about psychology and crowd manipulation was valuable to wrestlers who had athletic ability, but lacked the verbal skills that had made him famous. Controversial moments and backstage incidents throughout his later career showed his uncompromising nature hadn't softened with age. His 2003 HBO interview created problems with WWE management, who cited the interview and concerns about self-destructive behavior as reasons for his release. He still spoke his mind about wrestling politics and wasn't afraid to criticize decisions made by promoters or other wrestlers. Some people in the wrestling business found his outspokenness refreshing, while others thought he should have mellowed with age. His reputation as someone who always spoke his mind, regardless of political considerations, sometimes created problems with wrestling promoters who preferred wrestlers to follow company lines without question. He had opinions about wrestling booking, business practices, and industry politics that he shared whether people wanted to hear them or not. This honesty made him respected by fans, but sometimes difficult for promoters to work with. His diagnosis with Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2006 forced him to confront his own mortality in ways that wrestling injuries never had. Cancer was an opponent that couldn't be defeated through toughness or determination alone. The disease required medical treatment and lifestyle changes that were completely different from anything he had faced during his wrestling career. He finished radiation treatment on January 15, 2007. His openness about his health struggles surprised people who expected him to keep private matters to himself. Instead of hiding his cancer battle, he spoke publicly about his treatment and the challenges of dealing with a life-threatening illness. This honesty about his health problems showed a vulnerable side that audiences had rarely seen during his wrestling career, when he projected invincibility and toughness. Even when his body was failing, his mind and mouth remained as sharp as ever. The cancer treatment weakened him physically, but didn't affect his ability to cut promos or analyze wrestling storylines. He could still generate heat from audiences and create memorable moments, even when he couldn't perform at his previous athletic level. His final years proved that his greatest weapon had always been his ability to make people feel something through his words and presence. When Roddy Piper died in his sleep on July 31, 2015, at age 61, the wrestling world lost more than just a performer. They lost the blueprint for what a wrestling villain could be. Medical reports cite cardiopulmonary arrest caused by hypertension, with a pulmonary embolism listed as a contributing factor. His death shocked everyone because he had seemed to be recovering from his cancer battle and was still making occasional appearances. His WWE Hall of Fame induction in 2005, inducted by Ric Flair, had already cemented his legacy before his passing. WWE held a 10-bell salute on Raw, and many top stars, including The Rock and Ric Flair, publicly paid tribute to his influence on their careers. Piper didn't get the WWE title, but he rewrote what a villain in wrestling could do, with Piper's pit, showmanship, and real risk roof-raising promos that still shape heels today. Which Piper moment stuck with you? Like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until next time.